What do teachers wish you knew about what they do every day in the classroom? We are about to find out. I'm Katherine Schumacher with Public Education Partners, and today on Simple Civics EdTalks, we are joined by two incredible educator leaders from Greenville County Schools, Mary Leslie Anderson, a Title I ELA specialist, and Erin Rigot, an instructional coach. 5 years ago, Mary Leslie and Erin launched a consulting business called Rooted, focused on educational leadership. Erin and Mary Leslie will be joining us regularly on this podcast to share their experiences and have conversations with other educators about the great work that is happening every day in our schools and classrooms, address common misconceptions, and demystify the complex reality of teaching in today's public schools. Let's get the conversation started. Excited to be here with you two. Thank you for joining us here on Simple Civics EdTalks as we start this new journey together. I'm Mary Leslie and Erin. So you guys are going to be big partners on this series of podcasts. And so excited to have you and for our listeners to get to know you a little bit and sort of hear your story and your journey and set the stage for the work that we're going to be doing together and what we're going to be sharing with the community because there's so much great stuff. Mary Leslie, we'll start with you. Talk really quickly, just introduce yourself and sort of say how you and Erin, what it is you do and why your voices are going to be such a great part of Simple Civics EdTalks.
I'm Mary Leslie Anderson. I've been a Greenville County Schools employee for 25 years, my 25th year. My why, as I got into education in the late 90s, was to increase social capital. For my community. I'm a graduate of Greenville County Schools. This is my hometown, my community, and so I've always wanted to be here and enriching the community as my purpose and my home. In 2011, I was an assistant principal at Tanglewood Middle School. We were sitting around a conference room table, maybe even doing some interviews in the summer, and our secretary walked back into the conference room and she said, "There is a woman here who wants to hand her resume to y'all." And so I said, "Well, I'll come out or whatever." And so I went out and there was Erin. She introduced herself, told me she wanted a job at Tanglewood Middle School as an ELA teacher. And I said, "Well, we're all back here. Would you like to come back right now?" So she came back and the rest is kind of history. We hired her, of course. And 3 years later, I left to go be the principal at League Academy, and after my first year, Erin called and said, "I'm coming over," right? He got something for me, and then we've just been together ever since.
That's wonderful. That's so great. And, Erin, for longtime Simple Civics listeners, you'll know Erin is a repeat guest on the Simple Civics podcast. And so we interviewed you a couple of years ago, Derek Lewis and I did, about your advocacy around paid parental leave for teachers. So you've used your voice. What is your journey to sort of leadership and education? And how does this podcast and working with the work that you do with Mary Leslie, how does that play into it?
I did not grow up in Greenville County. I was an Army kid. And so I have lived all over and always wanted to feel part of a community. And so when I was hired in Greenville County Schools, that was my first experience being really embraced and feeling like I was getting to know what Greenville County was and also watching the growth of Greenville County at the time. It was around 2010, 2011. And I thankfully knew from my student teaching experience in Greenville that this was a good place to move to. So that's how I started in Greenville 15 years ago now, which is wild. I knew I wanted to keep teaching, but I did not have a great first year. I had a horrible first year teaching, and it was not a Greenville County school. But I knew the potential I had in this community, thankfully, from my student teaching experience. And so I did. I went school by school, and I had met someone at Tanglewood at Shining Stars,
Which is the Greenville County Schools recruiting event.
Correct. And so I said, okay, I'm just going to go in person. I was dressed for an interview. I was in a pencil skirt and my button-up sweater ready to go. And so that was just one of those days that was an amazing experience to be at the right place and truly find my fit. And Tanglewood was an amazing 4 years. I loved my time there, and it was the start of our journey. But I think what I've learned in this profession is that you just have to keep following the next part of your passion. I started just wanting to be a teacher, just wanting to be a middle school teacher. That was my ultimate goal. And so when I did that, after a few years, I was like, okay, what is my passion kind of calling me to next? And it was teaching writing. I love teaching writing, and I wanted to learn more about how to be a better teacher of writing. And so I followed that into the Upstate Writing Project that led me into some grant consulting across the state. And that opened my eyes to how other districts look in our state. And so fast forward 15 years, and now I'm really being pulled into advocacy and how to speak up for the students across the state, but also Greenville County. We are a wonderful, wonderful district. And I think there's a lot of talk out there in different avenues that's a lot of negative teacher talk, but there's also the toxic positivity teacher talk. And there's really not much in the middle that's talking about what it's actually like in the classroom today as a student, as a teacher, as a parent, as an administrator. So now in my instructional coach role at League and our entrepreneurial work, we are really trying to tap into what it is we do every day, how we're growing teachers, and how we can use what we're doing now to do that outside of just our building.
That is perfect and so exciting to hear. I think this idea, that sort of entrepreneurialness of teachers and teachers as leaders is such an underreported fact about what is going on in our teacher profession, because you are experts in leadership. You are coaches every single day in the classroom. And so I know an awful lot of amazing educators here in Greenville who have, these sort of, they're more elevated than side hustles, right? It's teacherpreneurialism. That's kind of what I've called it, because it really is this idea of how can you take the skills that you are learning in the classroom as an administrator, and how can you pour into, again, that next generation or folks that are in the field right now. And so you all had approached Derek Lewis from First Steps and I, since, we talked and had been on a podcast together before, and said, we're thinking of doing a podcast by teachers for teachers. Like, how can we do that? What was the why behind that? And talk a little bit about how your partnership with us on Simple Civics EdTalks is gonna support that.
The inception of Erin and I as entrepreneurs happened in 2020. The actual work of it began years before. We sort of dreamt, I guess, together as a principal and a teacher together of some sort of consulting firm that was literacy based. Actually, I'm an ELA teacher as well. And so that's really what it was. But then when COVID hit in 2020, the fall of 2020, we saw something in our educational community. It was so divisive. There was and continues to be an us versus them mentality between teachers and administrators, and also between teachers and parents, that really drives our work and what we want. We want to eliminate that. We want to grow our community into a place where the school is the center of each community, and where parents and teachers and administrators are all working together and understand that common good of the student and the strong emotional and capital build of the community, actually. And so we saw that, and we started our business in an effort to expose what teachers do every day for the students. What it really means is that we were so much more of a support to students and families than we ever realized. And we want people to know that.
Right. I think this idea of pulling back the curtain, because it's such a big system. And we talked, in sort of the first episode under this Simple Civics EdTalks umbrella, is why does it matter? And it's such a big part of our civic life. And here in Greenville, we do it so well. And I think that positive, how can we focus on positive stories and just sort of explain some things that people probably don't get? And you all, having been front lines, you really get it. And so I think it's really exciting to have that voice, and sort of think about that. So we've talked a little bit about some topics that we're interested in. What are some topics that, you guys think that your voice is going to be particularly powerful in talking about over these Simple Civics EdTalks episodes?
One that jumps to mind is technology. I think that's a really big conversation right now, especially with other parents that I know. We talk about that a lot. What does that mean in terms of cell phones and Chromebooks? Are the two that really come to mind. And we have an incredible, incredible tech team here in Greenville County Schools. So I'm excited to interview them and talk to them about what it actually looks like today in the classroom. There's so much out there that you can read and just assume that's happening in our own district when it may not be the case. There's also been some trial and error, right? Like I remember when we got Chromebooks for the very first time, all the way to now when we're trying to get a little bit away from them. So there's been such a learning of trial and error with that experience. I'm also very excited to have some parent conversations at different grade levels. What does the role of a parent look like for an elementary student versus a middle school student versus a high school student? We love middle school. I'm excited to bring in some elementary and high school people to the table to have some really good conversations that are going to help parents in this community realize that we're a team, that we are a team. We are trying to help your student. And we, like she mentioned, that mentality of us versus them, no one wins. No one wins in that. And so how to really help there be a better understanding of what elementary versus middle versus high looks like for the student, but also the parent.
I really want to change the way the community or the society in general thinks about education in terms of teachers and students. Like they're robots. Like the teacher walks in, delivers some information, and the students either take it in or they don't, and then we have grades. It's not that anymore. It's a very humanistic system that needs to be constantly developed, constantly changed in terms of teacher needs and student needs. And as we continue to grow, technology, like Erin said, the mental health crisis that we are facing day in and day out in our schools, and our parents are facing the same things, that we have got to make this idea of school more human. Just, we've got to understand people and people who are different than us, people who don't look like us. We've got to figure out how to understand each other and what motivates or inspires people to grow.
No, I think that's so wonderful. And I'm not, as I always say, I'm not an educator. I'm obviously a parent of students who've gone through Greenville County Schools and a public school graduate, and that's part of my passion. But the gap between perception and reality, and this idea of schools as community, like beating hearts in our communities, in our neighborhoods. And I think we are so lucky in Greenville and I think we take it for granted. And so I think that's something that's very exciting about, this sort of the K-12 space. And obviously we're going to be talking about early childhood. Derek and First Steps are going to be focusing. We're going to talk about post-secondary too. I think the idea is how can we look at that whole arc of how do you take a tiny human and turn them into an engaged, caring, thoughtful, educated person who is part of this community. I think that word, that community, it's such a powerful one to sit in our schools. So I think I agree with you. I think that's a great note. Obviously, we're going to have hopefully thousands of people listening to these podcasts. What is something that you want listeners to keep in mind when they hear your voice? What is something that you want them to keep in mind as you're sharing your lived experience from schools with them and with your colleagues?
A huge part of a goal with this podcast is to help those that are not in public education on a day-to-day basis build some trust with the teachers in their community. I want the trust to be both ways. I want to have some parent perspective as well. But I think a huge fight that we see on a day-to-day basis is just this lack of trust in public education. Not only do we want to protect public education, but I think there's just a really huge misunderstanding of what public education looks like today, because a lot of the time we think because I went to middle school or elementary school or high school, I can exactly envision what my student's doing all day or how that works or what it's like to be a teacher. But you really, unless you have walked in those teachers' shoes currently, not 5 years ago, not 10 years ago, not 20 years ago, you really don't have that perspective. And so I think building that trust of I can trust that this educator, no matter what they're teaching, has been well educated, is qualified, has experience, and immediately can be trusted in some capacity. I'm not saying educators are perfect by any means. We have a lot of growth every year. Every single year, things are different. So every single year, we are trying to learn and become better. But if we can build that trust just a little bit so that parents feel more likely to pick up the phone or send an email or just reach out to the teacher instead of talking about them or trying to just talk to their student or trying to jump to the principal, like trying to understand that that's a professional educator in the classroom and just building that level of trust back up.
With that trust, working on changing the perspective of folks who have never walked in a teacher's shoes or an administrator's shoes. Like Erin said, understanding that there's so much more to this job as a teacher or an administrator than just school. And that perspective, I think, is very important because as public educators, we're servants of the public. I believe in servant leadership. I believe in creating servant leadership environments at the schools where I have worked. And so just building the perspective, again, that you can trust your school leaders and your teacher leaders and your teachers to have the best interest at heart for the students. Like you really can. And that public school is not, the big bad school, dangerous minds or something, that really, we're blessed in Greenville to have these amazing public schools. And I want to change that perspective.
Yeah, no, I think that's wonderful. And I think that's a great note to end on because I really do think that helping people understand not only what we have here and the unique opportunities that are provided and the unique leaders like the two of you that we have working day in and day out, but really how can we as a community continue to support, invest, champion, and cheer on public school students, teachers. That's the through line. So thank you both. Thank you both for joining us on this journey together with Simple Civics EdTalks and for everything that you are doing every day to support the students here in Greenville County Schools.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Simple Civics EdTalks is a joint project of Greater Good Greenville, Greenville First Steps, and Public Education Partners Greenville County.
Hi, Simple Civics Greenville County listeners, Nathaniel here. If you've made it this far, then we think you'll really love our newsletter. Sign up for bonus content, updates, and more right in your inbox. Look for the link in the description that says newsletter to sign up, or visit us at simpleCivicsGreenvilleCounty.org. Find the link in the menu that says newsletter and sign up there. We'll see you again next week.